Jack Reacher stepped off the bus into the stale midday heat of Haven, Nebraska. The town wasn't on his map, not a destination he'd consciously chosen, but the slow, grinding rhythm of the interstate bus had lulled him into a state of near somnolence, and the name, announced in the driver's gravelly monotone, had snagged on something in his mind. Haven, a place of safety, of refuge. The irony was a hook, and Reacher had always been susceptible to a good hook. He stood on the cracked pavement of a deserted bus stop, the only other sign of life a tumbleweed skittering across the two-lane road. The town was a postcard from a forgotten decade, a row of single-story brick buildings with faded awnings, a diner with a flickering neon sign that read, "Eat," and a courthouse with a clock tower frozen at 3:15. The air hung thick and still, heavy with the scent of dust and something else, something faintly metallic and unsettling. Reacher had no luggage, just the clothes on his back and a folded-up toothbrush in his pocket. He was a ghost, a man who left no trail and sought no destination. But Haven had a feel to it, a low hum of something wrong just beneath the surface of its oppressive quiet. He could feel it in the way the curtains in the second-story windows seemed to twitch and then still as he walked past, in the way the silence wasn't peaceful, but expectant. He walked the length of the main street, his eyes taking in everything. The war memorial on the courthouse lawn, its bronze plaque green with age, listed a surprising number of names for a town this size. The sheriff's office, a squat building of cinder blocks and smoked glass, had a single dust-caked cruiser parked out front. The diner, he decided, was as good a place as any to start. The bell above the door chimed a cheerful, out-of-place tune as he entered. A half-dozen patrons, all men, sat hunched over coffee cups at the counter and in worn vinyl booths. Every head turned as he walked in, a collective, silent appraisal. Reacher ignored them, taking a seat at the far end of the counter. A young woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Sarah approached him, a coffee pot in hand. "What can I get for you?" she asked, her voice a low monotone. "Coffee," Reacher said. "Black." She filled a thick ceramic mug and slid it in front of him. The silence in the diner was a living thing, a coiled snake in the corner. Reacher took a slow sip of the coffee. It was bitter, burnt. He'd tasted worse. He was about to ask for a menu when the door chimed again. A man in a sheriff's uniform stood silhouetted against the bright sunlight. He was tall and broad, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in the sun too long. His eyes, small and dark, swept the room and landed on Reacher. "You're new," the sheriff said. It wasn't a question. Reacher took another sip of his coffee. "Just passing through." The sheriff walked slowly towards him, his boots thudding heavily on the linoleum floor. The other men in the diner watched, their faces impassive, their eyes missing nothing. "We don't get many strangers in Haven," the sheriff said, his voice a low rumble. "Folks around here like their privacy." "I'm a private person," Reacher said, his voice even. The sheriff stopped a few feet from him, his hand resting on the butt of his holstered pistol. "What's your name?" "Reacher." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Reacher, that's it?" "It's enough." A muscle twitched in the sheriff's jaw. "I'm Sheriff Brody, and in my town, we like to know who we're dealing with." "I'm a guy drinking a bad cup of coffee," Reacher said. "That's all you need to know." For a long moment, the two men locked eyes. The tension in the diner was thick enough to cut with a knife. Reacher didn't move, didn't even blink. He'd been in 100 diners like this, in 100 towns just as quiet and just as wrong. He knew the dance. Finally, the sheriff gave a curt nod. "Finish your coffee and be on your way. The next bus out is at 6. "Thanks for the schedule," Reacher said, his voice devoid of any warmth. Sheriff Brody turned and walked out, the bell on the door chiming his departure. The collective sigh of relief in the diner was almost audible. The men went back to their coffee, their conversations resuming in low murmurs. Sarah, the waitress, refilled his cup without a word, her hand trembling slightly. "He's a friendly guy," Reacher said, his voice low enough for only her to hear. She gave a small, humorless laugh. "Sheriff Brody believes in keeping the peace. His peace." And what is that exactly? She glanced around, her eyes wide with a fear that seemed out of place in the middle of the day in a small-town diner. Haven is a quiet town, mister. It's better to keep it that way. Reacher finished his coffee in silence. The bad taste in his mouth wasn't just from the burnt beans. The sheriff's unwelcoming greeting, the fear in the waitress's eyes, the oppressive silence of the town, it all pointed to something hidden, something rotten. And as much as he was a man who kept moving, Jack Reacher was also a man who couldn't walk away from a puzzle, especially one that smelled of trouble. He left a couple of dollars on the counter and walked back out into the sun-drenched street. The 6 o'clock bus was a long way off. He had time to kill. And in a town like Haven, he had a feeling that killing time might be the least of his worries. He decided to take a walk, to stretch his legs and get a feel for the layout of the town. He ambled past the courthouse, its frozen clock a silent testament to the town's stagnation. He passed a small, dusty library, its windows dark, a closed sign hanging crookedly in the door. The whole town seemed to be holding its breath. As he rounded a corner, he saw a small park, a patch of brown grass with a rusty swing set and a single gnarled oak tree. A woman was sitting on a bench under the tree, her head in her hands. She was crying, her sobs quiet and desperate. Reacher wasn't a man who went looking for trouble, but he was a man who recognized distress. He walked over to the bench and stood a few feet away. "Ma'am?" he said, his voice gentle. The woman looked up, her face streaked with tears. She was in her late 50s, with graying hair and a kind face etched with grief. I'm sorry," she stammered, trying to wipe away her tears. "I didn't think anyone was here." "It's a quiet town," Reacher said. "It used to be a good town," she said, her voice trembling. "A safe town." "What happened?" She hesitated, her eyes darting around as if she expected to see someone listening. "My son. He's gone." "Gone where?" "He's been missing for a week," she said, her voice breaking. "Sheriff Brody. He says he just took off, that he'll be back when he's ready. But I know my boy. He wouldn't just leave without a word." "What's your son's name?" "Daniel," she said. "Daniel Miller." Reacher filed the name away. "Did he have any trouble? Anyone he was afraid of?" The woman, who introduced herself as Martha Miller, shook her head. "Daniel was a good boy. He worked at the old mill, the one just outside of town. He was quiet, kept to himself, but he was happy here." Her voice faltered. "Or so I thought." She told him about Daniel, about his love for history and his fascination with the town's founding. She mentioned a project he'd been working on in his spare time, something about the town's archives, a series of old ledgers he'd found in the library. "He said he'd found something," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Something important. A secret. A secret." The word hung in the air between them. "What kind of secret?" Reacher asked. "He wouldn't tell me. He said it was dangerous. He said he needed to be careful." Her face crumpled in a fresh wave of grief. "And now he's gone." Reacher looked around the deserted park, at the silent houses, the frozen clock on the courthouse. A missing boy, a frightened mother, a town that seemed to be holding its breath. The pieces were starting to click into place, forming the outline of a puzzle he felt compelled to solve. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice firm but reassuring. "I'll look for your son." She looked at him, a glimmer of hope in her tear-filled eyes. "You will?" "I will." He didn't know why he said it. He was a drifter, a man with no ties and no obligations. But he had a code, a simple, unwritten set of rules he lived by. And one of them was that you didn't turn your back on a mother's grief. He spent the rest of the afternoon walking the town, this time with a purpose. He went to the library, but it was locked up tight. He walked out to the old mill, a hulking, dilapidated structure on the edge of town. A no trespassing sign was nailed to the rusted gate. He ignored it and slipped through a gap in the fence. The mill was silent, a tomb of rotting wood and rusting machinery. The air was thick with the smell of decay. He found the small office where Daniel had worked. The room had been tossed, papers scattered across the floor, drawers pulled out and their contents dumped. Someone had been looking for something. He sifted through the mess, his trained eyes scanning for anything out of place. He found a small, leather-bound notebook tucked under a loose floorboard. Inside, Daniel's neat handwriting filled the pages with notes about the town's history, copied from the old ledgers he'd found in the library. The last entry was dated the day he disappeared. It was short and cryptic. The code is in the names, the first and the last. They all point to the same place, the place where the town's greatest sin is buried. The code, the secret. It was all tied together. Reacher pocketed the notebook. As he was about to leave, he heard a noise, the crunch of gravel outside. He flattened himself against the wall, his hand instinctively going to his side. Two men, big and beefy, with the hard, empty eyes of hired muscle, stepped into the office. "He ain't here," one of them growled. "Brody said to check again," the other one said. "Make sure he didn't leave nothing behind." So the sheriff was involved. Reacher wasn't surprised. He waited until the men had finished their clumsy search and left. Then he slipped out of the mill and headed back into town. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the empty streets. The 6 o'clock bus had come and gone. He hadn't been on it. He knew he was no longer just passing through. He was a part of Haven's story now, a ghost who had decided to stay and haunt the town's secrets. He had a missing boy to find and a forgotten code to break, and he had a feeling that in a town like Haven, the truth was a dangerous thing to uncover. But Jack Reacher had never been one to back down from a fight, especially when the odds were stacked against him. The night was falling, and in the heart of Nebraska, a storm was brewing. Reacher needed to get into the library. That was where Daniel had found the ledgers, the source of the code. But the library was locked, and breaking in would attract the wrong kind of attention, especially with Sheriff Brody and his goons on the lookout for him. He needed a key. He remembered Sarah, the waitress from the diner. There was a fear in her eyes, but also a spark of something else, something that told him she knew more than she was letting on. He decided to pay her another visit. The diner was almost empty when he walked in. Sarah was wiping down the counter, her movements slow and weary. She looked up as he approached, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "You missed your bus," she said, her voice flat. "I decided to stay a while," Reacher said. "I'm looking for a book." "The library's closed." "I know, but I thought you might be able to help me." She stopped wiping the counter and looked at him, her eyes guarded. "Why would I do that?" "Because you know something's wrong in this town," Reacher said, his voice low and steady. "And I think you want to do something about it." She didn't answer, but he could see the conflict in her eyes. "I met Martha Miller," he said. "Her son is missing." Sarah's face paled. "Daniel." He was looking into the town's history. He found something in the old ledgers in the library. He watched her carefully, saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes. She knew. "My aunt is the town librarian," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "She's been sick. I have a key." "I need to see those ledgers, Sarah." She hesitated, her fear at war with her conscience. "It's dangerous, mister. You don't know what you're getting into." "I can handle myself," Reacher said, "but I need your help." After a long moment of silence, she nodded. "Meet me behind the diner in an hour, and don't let anyone see you." An hour later, under the cover of darkness, Sarah led him to the back door of the library. She fumbled with the key, her hands shaking. The lock clicked, and they slipped inside. The library was dark and silent, the air thick with the smell of old paper and dust. Sarah led him to a small back room, the town archives. Rows of shelves were lined with leather-bound books, old newspapers, and boxes of documents. "The ledgers are over here," she said, her voice a hushed whisper. She pointed to a shelf of thick, heavy books. Reacher took one down and opened it. The pages were filled with handwritten entries, records of births, deaths, and land transactions, dating back to the town's founding in the late 1800s. He found Daniel's notebook in his pocket and opened it to the last entry. The code is in the names, the first and the last. He started with the first ledger, scanning the names of the founding families. He cross-referenced them with the war memorial, with the names on the old gravestones in the town cemetery. A pattern began to emerge. Certain names appeared over and over, connected by a series of land deals, all centered around a large parcel of land just outside of town. The old mill was on that land. He worked for hours, Sarah by his side, her initial fear replaced by a growing sense of determination. They found a series of coded messages, hidden in the margins of the ledgers, a simple substitution cipher. The key, they discovered, was the names on the war memorial. As they deciphered the messages, a dark story began to unfold. A story of a hidden treasure, a cache of gold stolen from a Union payroll train during the Civil War, buried somewhere on the land where the mill now stood. The town's founding families had been a part of it, and their descendants had guarded the secret for generations. "This is what Daniel found," Sarah said, her voice filled with awe and fear. "This is why he's missing." "It's not just about the gold," Reacher said, his eyes scanning the last deciphered message. "It's about what they did to keep it a secret." The message spoke of a pact, a blood oath to protect the secret at any cost. It mentioned a guardian, a role passed down through the generations, a protector of the treasure. "Sheriff Brody," Sarah breathed. His family was one of the founding families. It all made sense now. Brody wasn't just a corrupt sheriff, he was the guardian of a dark secret, a secret he was willing to kill to protect. Daniel Miller had stumbled upon that secret, and now he was a loose end that needed to be tied up. Suddenly, they heard a noise outside, the sound of a car engine. They looked out the window and saw a pair of headlights cutting through the darkness. It was the sheriff's cruiser. "He knows we're here," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "We need to go," Reacher said. "Now." They slipped out the back door just as Brody and his two deputies were coming in the front. They ran through the dark, deserted streets, their hearts pounding in their chests. "Where can we go?" Sarah asked, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Someplace he won't think to look for us," Reacher said. "The old mill." It was a risky move, but it was the only one they had. They made their way to the edge of town, to the hulking silhouette of the mill against the moonlit sky. They slipped through the fence and found a place to hide in the labyrinthine interior of the old building. From their hiding place, they watched as the sheriff's cruiser and another car pulled up to the mill. Brody and his deputies got out, along with the two men Reacher had seen earlier. They were all armed. "They're looking for us," Sarah whispered. "They're looking for whatever Daniel left behind," Reacher corrected her. "And they're not going to leave until they find it." He knew they were trapped, but he also knew that he had something Brody wanted, the notebook, the key to the code, and that gave him an advantage. "Stay here," he told Sarah, "and don't make a sound." He moved through the shadows of the mill, a ghost in the machine. He was outnumbered and outgunned, but he was in his element. He was a hunter, and the night was his ally. He took out the first deputy with a single silent blow to the back of the head. He disarmed the second one and left him groaning on the floor. The two hired guns were next. They were big, but they were slow and clumsy. Reacher moved like a phantom, a blur of motion in the darkness. He left them unconscious in a pile of sawdust. Now it was just him and Brody. The sheriff was in the office, tearing the place apart, looking for the notebook. Reacher stepped into the doorway, the notebook in his hand. "Looking for this?" he said. Brody spun around, his gun drawn. "Reacher, I should have known you were more trouble than you were worth." "You made a mistake," Reacher said, his voice cold and hard. "You messed with the wrong person." "You have no idea what you're involved in," Brody snarled. "This is bigger than you." "It's about gold," Reacher said, "and murder." Brody's eyes widened in surprise. "How did you—" "Daniel Miller was a smart kid. He figured it out, and you killed him for it." Brody laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "He's not dead. Not yet. He's a loose end. And once I have that notebook, I'll tie it up. Just like I'm going to tie you up." He raised his gun, but Reacher was faster. He threw the notebook at Brody's face, a move the sheriff wasn't expecting. As Brody flinched, Reacher closed the distance between them. The fight was brutal and short. Brody was big and strong, but Reacher was a trained killer. He moved with a deadly precision, every blow calculated to inflict maximum damage. He broke Brody's wrist, then his nose. The sheriff went down hard, his gun clattering across the floor. Reacher stood over him, his chest heaving. "Where's Daniel?" Brody just spat blood and glared at him. Reacher picked up the sheriff's gun and pressed it to his forehead. "I'm only going to ask you one more time." The fear in Brody's eyes was real now. "The old well," he croaked, "behind the mill." Reacher left him there and ran out the back of the mill, Sarah close behind him. They found the well covered with a heavy wooden lid. They pulled it open and peered into the darkness. "Daniel?" Sarah called out. A weak voice answered from the bottom of the well. "Here. I'm here." He was alive. They found a rope and lowered it down to him. He was weak and dehydrated, but he was alive. They pulled him out, and he collapsed into Sarah's arms. The sound of sirens filled the air. The state police, alerted by a call from a payphone by Reacher before he went to the mill, were arriving. It was over. The next morning, Reacher stood at the bus stop, the same one where he had arrived just 2 days before. The town of Haven was a different place now. The silence was gone, replaced by the buzz of police activity and the chatter of news reporters. The secret of the gold was out, and the descendants of the founding families, including the town's mayor and several prominent citizens, were being arrested. Sheriff Brody, his face a mask of bandages, was being led away in handcuffs. Sarah and Daniel Miller were there to see him off. "How can we ever thank you?" Daniel said, his voice still weak but filled with gratitude. "You don't have to," Reacher said. "Just stay out of trouble." He looked at Sarah. "You did a brave thing." She smiled, a genuine happy smile that transformed her tired face. "So did you." The bus pulled up, its brakes hissing. Reacher got on and took a seat by the window. As the bus pulled away, he saw Sarah and Daniel waving at him. He didn't wave back. He was a ghost again, a man with no destination and no past. He had come to Haven by chance, and he had changed it forever. But the town had also changed him. It had reminded him of who he was and what he stood for. He looked out the window at the passing landscape, the endless fields of Nebraska. He didn't know where he was going, but that was the way he liked it. The road was his home, and there was always another town, another puzzle, another fight waiting for him just over the horizon. Jack Reacher was on the move again, a solitary traveler on a journey with no end. Titulo, Jack Reacher, caught in the forgotten code. ID Categoria, 22, thumb. He stepped off a bus in a forgotten town and uncovered a deadly secret. Deskrakow. In Jack Reacher, caught in the forgotten code, the legendary drifter finds himself in the deceptively quiet town of Haven, Nebraska. What begins as a simple stopover quickly spirals into a dark mystery when he stumbles upon a grieving mother and a missing son. As Reacher digs deeper, he uncovers a century-old secret, a hidden code, and a conspiracy that the town's most powerful figures will kill to protect. This gripping thriller will keep you on the edge of your seat as Reacher uses his unique skills to unravel the truth and deliver his own brand of justice. Subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any new videos. Jack Reacher, thriller, mystery, suspense, action, crime, fiction, audiobook, storytelling, Lee Child, conspiracy, small town, mystery, forgotten code, justice, Reacher, book, novel, audio, story, adventure, hero, vigilante, investigation, secret, danger, plot, character, narrative, voiceover, YouTube, prompt. An ultra-realistic image of a lone man, Jack Reacher, standing in the middle of a deserted, dusty main street of a small, forgotten American town at dusk. The man is tall and muscular, seen from behind, wearing simple, durable clothes. The setting sun casts long, dramatic shadows. The town's buildings are old and weathered with faded signs. There's a palpable sense of tension and mystery in the air. The image should be cinematic, with high contrast and rich, deep colors.